Hello again, and welcome to my video on restoring rusted out cast iron. So in this case, it's going to be a cast iron griddle. So my wife found this cast iron griddle at an antique store. Pretty rusted, metal flaking off. There's old carbon deposits, but a lot of rust. There's the griddle side. As you can see, pretty rusty, pretty dirty, pretty roached out. There is the label. It's a world famous brand. So anyways, I'm gonna take it from this to fully restore it. I'm gonna show you how. So the first thing we need to do is clean it. I put that metal grate at the bottom of the sink just to keep from scratching the sink or anything like that. And this cleaning is just going to be water and a little bit of scrubbing. We're not getting any of the rust off or anything here. And I like to use this chainmail that I bought for cleaning my cast iron. This one you can actually put a sponge into, but you don't need the sponge. But the chainmail is great because it's good at getting the carbon deposits off from when you cook things, burnt on food and things like that. It breaks that stuff apart, and all you need is a little bit of water. It doesn't tend to scratch off the seasoning once the seasoning happens. So I'm just gonna get in there in between each of the little grill tines here and scrape off all of the black deposits and get that as clean as I can, because in the next step, where we go to remove the rust, that black carbon deposit does get in the way of that process. So the more we can get of that off, the better. So I'm just gonna, little elbow grease, get in there and scrape off as much of that black stuff as I can. And you might actually see me use a knife in there at some point, or a butter knife, to try and scrape a little bit more of that black stuff off. You could use Scotch-Brite or wire brush or anything like that too if you have some really problem spots. But just get in there and scrape away with a little bit of water and get as much of that carbon off as you can. Okay, I'll give it one final rinse off here. So when you do a regular cast iron pan, it's a lot easier because you don't have to get around all the edges of those grates. So that's what it looks like. It's a little bit of black stuff on there. I should have taken a little bit more time to scrape that off, but I didn't. Okay, the next part is the acid bath. So just a big plastic tub, and we're going to submerge the cast iron in acid. And so I use the most readily available acid and pretty cost effective, which is just vinegar. And vinegar, as you know, is acetic acid. And so just full concentration white vinegar, and we're just going to pour that on top and let it sit in acid, and that's going to chemically react with the rust, with the iron oxide, and it's going to basically just pull the rust away from the iron itself, so you'll just be left with bare iron. So we're just going to pour that right on top. Alright, so we want to keep that fully submerged for 24 to 36 hours to let that chemical reaction take place and get all that rust off of there. Okay, so that's about 12 hours into the acid bath process. And as you can see, the vinegar is turning a bit of a rusty yellow color as it dissolves the rust. There's bubbles everywhere. It makes a little fizzing sound the entire time, and you can actually see, if you look in the middle of the screen, you can see the bubbles just rising off of the cast iron. So that's good. It means the chemical reaction is taking place and it's working. right, so here we are about 36 hours after we started the acid bath, and you can really see now just how much rust has come off into solution. Lots of bubbles on there, and it's actually at this point still fizzing away quite nicely. I mean, you could leave it in there even longer if you wanted to, but there's really no point now because the rust will be detached now from the cast iron. I mean, you could leave it in there till the rust just completely dissolves off into solution, but that would take a really long time. So all we really need to do is get the rust to detach, and that's already happened now. So you can actually see a couple of spots there on the back where the rust is just detached itself from the griddle, and it's nice and loose. So I'm just checking that right now. And we're totally ready for the next step, which is just to wash and scrub off the rest of the rust. And so kind of like the first step in the process, I'm just gonna give it a good rinsing off with some water, get all the vinegar off of there. And then for this step, I'm going to use a stainless steel wool to do the scrubbing. I find that works the best. And you can use Scotch-Brite again if you have any. That works too, but stainless steel wool I find works really well. Just, you know, a little bit of light scrubbing, and you'll see that the rust comes off quite easily now. And there you go. Look at that beautiful gray cast iron color. You can really see the difference where the rust has just come right off thanks to that acid bath. And so just get in there with your steel wool and get every little nook and cranny around all the handles and everything like that too. Again, with a flat pan is much easier. With these grills that have the tines, they like to collect a lot of extra junk around the edges, so it takes a little bit more elbow grease to get that all off, but flat side is really quick and easy, as you can see there. Now one final rinse. There we have it. Nice, clean, rust-free griddle. So now we're into the next step, which is going to be preparing it for seasoning. So I'm just going to take some paper towel and get rid of all the excess water that's on there. I want it to be dry before I go on there with the oil. And so now that it's exposed to air and it's bare metal, it's going to start oxidizing right away. And you're going to kind of see that with the cloth, see that black stuff, that's all oxidation. It's kind of like when you cut an apple, it starts turning brown right away in the air. So the oxygen in the air is an unstable chemical and wants to react with everything that it can. And so iron is definitely one of those things, as we know, it's going to start to oxidize and rust right away. And that's coming off already just as I wipe the water off. And so you want to kind of just dry it off real quick and then get the oil on there. The oil is going to immediately stop the oxidation process because it blocks the oxygen from touching the metal. So I have a little cloth that I reuse over and over again for seasoning cast iron. That way, you know, if you use a paper towel, you get it oily and then you throw it out. Whereas with this cloth, it's always nice and oily, so you don't have to keep using paper towel over and over again. I'm using grapeseed oil because it has a pretty high smoke point. Don't use olive oil. Olive oil burns off at a much lower temperature, and when you're seasoning, you want a nice high temperature. And so, yeah, use a generous amount of oil and make sure you get every single nook and cranny covered in oil. That's why I'm using lots of it at first. So every side, every handle, every part of it that's cast iron, you want very well covered in oil for this first step. Okay, next I'm just taking a rag and I am now just sort of wiping off the excess grapeseed oil. And you really want to do this step. I know it seems counterintuitive, but get rid of all that excess oil. You want just a very thin layer on there when you start baking it. Because if you have a thick layer of oil, when it bakes on, it's going to be too thick and it'll chip off, so your seasoning coat will chip easily. Whereas if you do a very thin layer, it's a lot more resilient. So you do many, many thin layers, not one or two really thick layers. So get as much of that excess oil off there as you can and start preheating either your oven, or I use the barbecue actually. I find that if you have a barbecue, it's better because of the smoke will, so if you have to do it indoors, which I've done, just make sure you can open the windows up and ventilate. And also the barbecue doesn't have an upper temperature limit. You can just get it as hot as it'll go. So that's in there at the highest heat setting and it's smoking really nice. So as long as it's smoking, leave it in there because that means the oil is still burning. About 15 to 20 minutes at a time. All right, so here we are about 15 minutes later, and as you can see, it's no longer smoking, so that's good. It means that first layer of oil has burnt into the cast irons, burnt off. So I just take my oil rag and I use a pair of tongs and just kind of give it another light coat of oil. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm just going to keep repeating that process over and over again. Light coat of oil, wait about 15 minutes till it's not smoking anymore, and do that about 2, 3, 4 times. As many times as you can stand, I guess, especially if you're doing it indoors and you're getting all smoky in the house. Make sure you just get every single spot, nook and cranny that you can on there. Don't forget the other side. Yeah, and just keep repeating the process over and over again. Oil, and then 15 minutes of burning off. Do that 2 or 3 times and you'll be good to go. And there it is, the finished product. Now we have a fully restored, beautifully seasoned cast iron griddle. It looks great. Barely recognizable from the rusty old thing that my wife found at the antique shop. And that's ready to cook on. And that seasoning layer will make it completely non-stick. You get a proper coat of seasoning, all you need to do is essentially wash it off. So, thanks again for watching this video on this restoration project. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you have any questions. And we'll see you next time.